Now, just a few weeks ago, I posted this video announcing my first call for scores here on this channel. This led to over 60 composers from all around the world who sent me their orchestral music, which was the prompt for this specific call for scores. Out of these 65 have made it to the final round, which I'll be adjudicating alongside my esteemed panel, which I'll be introducing to you very soon. The names of all these finalists have been redacted from their scores. We'll reveal all of them once the judging is complete. By the end of the video, we'll be giving away one free license of the playback engine NotePerformer 4. Now, this happens to be the same engine that I use in my own composing workflow. In addition, every finalist will receive a free one-on-one, 1-hour virtual session with me to discuss anything related to composition. My name is Saad Haddad, and welcome to the first edition of the Saad Haddad Prize. All right, let's meet our panel. First up, we have one of my former Juilliard classmates, a composer who's worked with many of the top orchestras in the world, including the St. Louis Symphony, the Minnesota Orchestra, and the Aspen Philharmonic, Nikki Son.
Hi.
Next up, we have our Pulitzer Prize finalist and multi-Grammy-nominated composer who's written orchestral scores for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Detroit Symphony, and the Cincinnati Symphony, Christopher Cerrone. All right, so let's lay out some ground rules. We'll first listen to each of the 5 orchestral pieces once from beginning to end. After each listening, we'll discuss each piece according to 3 criteria: technique, creativity, and presentation. Once we've listened to and discussed every work, we'll finish off with a final deliberation and announce the winning work. At that time, I'll also reveal the names of the finalists. Let's start off with our first entry number 2.
It has a lot of interesting ideas, and I actually find it to be a bit under orchestrated, honestly, in terms of sort of thinking about the opening where you're looking at this vibraphone part. You need to support this kind of ostinato-ish thing in the vibraphone with some strings or something to give it a little bit more sense of sustain than it would, with this one single person in the back of the hall. You might find yourself, you almost always need to orchestrate the sustain of an instrument that's struck.
I mean, I thought especially the beginning part reminded me a lot of the Game of Pairs, Bartok, Concerto for Orchestra, how like they have, and I thought it was interesting how like we opened with this sort of like octave texture and then we move into like different intervals. I thought that was very well planned out.
The composer sticks almost exclusively to vibraphone, and there are kind of long passages. I mean, the other instruments I always look at when I'm studying scores is the percussion part, and I noticed that there are sort of these extended passages where, even if you're just let's say we're limiting our timpani player to just timpani, that you could maybe have a lot of other coloristic supports that happen in the percussion part, because I really do feel like percussion is one of the large ways that composers differentiate the colors and structurally within the orchestra.
I actually really liked how he kind of held off on a lot of the bass writing. Like, you don't really get a real bass note until page 6.
Yeah, that's very clever. I agree.
And I think part 2 for me was a little less successful than the other parts. I think it was because of the harmonic rhythm too. We tend to change chords like on the downbeat pretty much the whole time in that section. So that felt a little bit dragging for me. And the first part especially was like very interesting rhythmically throughout the melodic line, but we kind of lose that sense in the second part.
Yeah, that's a good point, because in that first section, you don't really get a sense of the harmony as much. But in the second section, it's like it's almost too obvious what the harmony is.
It gets like really just kind of like heavy.
Let's move on then to entry number 7.
flow of the whole piece was really, really wonderful. The timing of events, absolutely great, especially that build-up, that big build-up that happened before page 12. That was really great. I also really loved how this person used the orchestra as an orchestra. It sounded very orchestral to me when the 2D section happened. I think it's gonna sound really great in a big hall. Some things that I did notice, like it's so easy to just kind of do this string crossing thing with the string section, and especially when they're playing open strings for a very long time, I think it can get a little tiring and a little predictable, especially where we hear like a lot of open strings in the cello. I thought it'd be cool to maybe like move that harmony out around a little bit. I thought the harmonic rhythm was something that maybe this composer could think about a little bit more. But I also feel like this sort of like orchestral piece opening with string harmonics, it's so just widely used, right? Like we hear that in almost all student orchestra concerts.
I think I pretty much agree with all of your comments. Yeah, and I was just sort of looking at the harmonic structure. It sort of seems to hover around this like A-ish thing for quite most of the piece. I agree that this is probably happening because of the nature of the string harmonics to sort of pick a key that works well. And it's clearly like I'm sort of seeing like maybe like an Andrew Norman influence on this music, especially the kind of simple to ecstatic architecture. My kind of one critique was actually that I feel like and it's funny because Andrew's a good friend of mine, and the one thing we talk about a lot is that when you get to the tutti, it is so hard not to become a bit generic. And I found the tutti itself to become just maybe a bit less individualistic and less individualized. And kind of I'm like, okay, we're in a tutti. It's a filmic sort of tutti, and I just it's very hard to get away from that. The one thing I thought about is it just could be longer as a piece, and the build was great, but then I'm like, oh, we're out of it already, it's over. So one thing that, as just to kind of go back to your comment, Nikki, just to think about the kind of manipulation of harmony or moving around keys is sort of extending out the ideas, because you do kind of wind up in this somewhat static place. But otherwise, I think that the orchestration is really skillful, and I think this is, having seen a lot of pieces like this, I think it would work. There was nothing that caught me as not realistically working. I wonder if, just to respond to the string crossing thing, if it was a bit more individuated, and so that it wasn't all just sort of sextuplets, if it was different figurations or maybe more individuated figurations of 5s, 6s, and 4s, or just letting people be a little bit more free rather than in this kind of constant variolage sextuplet counting, if it would also be more interesting.
And like this person wrote a lot of like out of time textures anyway for the winds, so it could be cool to like kind of implement that in the string writing too. Yeah, I feel like once the trumpets and also snare drums start playing, it's game over. That's all you hear, pretty much.
Yeah, unless the violins are like at the very top of their range or something.
Right.
That's the only shot you have. Like just supporting the snap pits might be the best thing you can possibly do there.
I have one tiny thing. This is more like a very like technical thing. So like if we look at page 16, like we have piano crescendo to sforzando. Sforzando technically isn't really a dynamic. It's more like an articulation. So I think it's always good to just eliminate the questions that orchestra might ask during the rehearsal. Just put fortissimo or forte, just specify that rather than just put sforzando. Yeah.
That's such a good point, and I think I've like hit that a few times, and it's just like, well, it's just forte. You're not like, are you going like crescendo to something and then slightly louder? You're just really, and also placing it rhythmically, like having the exact note.
Yeah, it's like tied. So like, what are we actually doing with the sforzando?
Right?
Sforzando means like a slightly louder version of a thing. So if you're in a crescendo, what is slightly louder than your current? I think Nikki and I probably have, certainly you Saad, have gotten into like question and answer time with the orchestra, and that's like the worst place to be. Just them being like, oh, excuse me, and then this, what is this? And then you're just like, oh no, keep going back to rehearsing. Stop talking to me.
No, I literally have nightmares before my first rehearsals. Like, oh, clarinet part is not in the right transposition. Like, oh, I'm missing a quarter note rest. It's just like, oh my gosh. You lose so much time just like looking at little silly things like that in rehearsal. So it's good to just eliminate anything like that before.
All right, let's move on then to entry number 19.
we have this very long stretch of just strings holding for a long time, right? I think that sort of became a little bit static to me as it went on. I think it would have helped a lot if we had more dimension in dynamic. If they were doing all these different shapes, like dynamically and like building something together or separately, that would have been interesting. But I thought generally speaking it was a very beautiful piece, but it was just a little bit one dimension in the way that this was all presented. Even this 16th note pattern, I thought it would be really cool if we had a few like interruptions rather than just da 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 all the
Or
time.
like
But what if
or like layers, like triplets or quintuplets.
exactly, or even just like da 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 da, some like offbeat stuff, like just little changes throughout the piece, but it just did just one thing, and that was kind of it for me.
I think if the piece just was shorter, it would do a lot.
I agree with that.
Because I think really the piece has like 2 ideas and a coda, and like that's a perfect 8-9 minute piece. Intro, add pulses, whistles, get out of there, and that's a lot for 11 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been even longer if some of these ideas were executed in a different, like for example, my thinking was when we got to that A major chord, like around page 7 it was, I thought it would have been interesting if the strings just went all out with that and just had some kind of harmonic, like actual harmonic progression that came out of the A major.
The strings thing feels like the weakest thing in the piece because it just sort of hangs out in football land almost the whole time, and you're just like, I want the strings to do something beyond
Right.
that.
That's the part I disagreed about. I don't mind the strings in football land. I like them, but I wish the notes were not the right the
I
right
think you're
notes.
speaking from the trauma of like having like strings try to play your microtonal melodies. You're like, great
That's
idea. Have it play whole notes.
Yeah, I don't know,
That's
like
true.
rehearsal D is called fluid. For me, that wasn't very fluid. I thought it could be more fluid in terms of texture.
Again, I don't mind the stasis. They gave us A major. That was their fault. In my mind, I expect some audible tertian harmony to come back. And they gave that to us like 2.5 minutes in. And for the next 8 minutes, I didn't hear it at all. It's like I want that payoff. That's the word. I want the payoff.
So everything escalating slightly sort of sounds actually static, and actually static sounds boring. And I think this piece at times sort of like meandered into the like, well, where are we going with all this? They add the brass at the right time, they add the percussion at the right time. So there's nothing that I was mad about, but I don't know, are we looking for harmonic change? Like, what are we looking for here that is really missing?
I think personally for me, I think it's a combination of the harmony changing, and also at times I would like some of these families of instruments to just stop playing for even a few seconds, just to change the timbral landscape. Because I like the footballs, but I don't mind them just playing footballs, but they don't always have to play.
I think the one thing that we should take into account is this is also the most interesting and ambitious of the pieces we've heard so far.
Yes.
So like, it's a lot easier to make something artistically successful when you're imitating other music more clearly. And so this, to me, I hear influences, but they're not quite as transparent,
Here is number 46 called Orbis.
Really ambitious. Structure was interesting. I do think it is a little too long. The brass only section, which was good, I thought that section definitely could be maybe half the length. Also, like that section, it's all ascending motion, and also I thought it got kind of tiring when do the ascending thing and then hold the top note for a long time. It just like kind of became very repetitive. thought about
Yeah, well,
that
it's actually
sort of
interesting
thing.
because it's sort
Yeah.
of like if you're just dealing with overtones, like it strikes me as a really good place to add in some strings, to like strings playing all overtones as well, like bass harmonics, something that would sort of add to the texture in a way that, because I agree with you, it stays sort of static and it doesn't. There's clearly intention. I appreciate that there's a lot of intentionality behind all of this.
Yeah.
Well, I would think there's just like a lot of like maybe fussiness in the orchestration that would probably like just sort of thinking about it, well, then all these are all assigned, in a kind of violin 1, 3, 4, I do it. Like it's like, okay, like how about just like violin 2 play that note? You know what I mean? Like these kinds of extreme divisi are rarely effective and often get people annoyed at you. And it just be like, okay, violin 1 play that part, violin 2 divide. It's like I appreciate the specificity, but it also just feels like, and there's a lot of cool stuff in here.
What do you think about, for example, the string divisi at letter O? Because there's string divisis where this person has big pos times chords, but then there's this stuff where it's like melodies that are divisi, like ultra divisi too.
This didn't strike me as problematic at all, actually, because it just struck me as kind of a texture of heterophony.
I mean, as someone that's tried doing this exact thing with an orchestra,
Plus quarter tones.
yeah, I could say that to me, with a real orchestra, it's not really worth it. I feel like I could have got the same effect dividing it in 4 voices. Like, I don't need 8 voices.
I think sometimes more specific is better. Like, I think actually the brass stuff needs to be more written out. And I think even if they had a kind of 4 bars of examples, like play this almost an exactly written out 4 bars and then being like improvise similarly on this. But right now, I mean, if I had the mock-up, maybe, but if I was just looking at the score, I wouldn't know what they want with this kind of brass fanfare stuff, unless they want straight rips.
See, that's unclear to me.
Yeah.
It's also unclear what the articulation is, because sometimes this person puts accents at the end of the lick, which makes me think that it's tongued, and then sometimes there isn't an accent, so is it a slurred rip to the end? So it's not consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I think pragmatism doesn't necessarily have a polarity towards indeterminate or indeterminate, but I think some of this stuff should be more indeterminate and some of it should be more determinate, just to make it more practical.
Yeah. And also, I feel like when the strings are divided so much throughout the whole piece, you don't actually get that like rich orchestra sound. It's just all divisi all throughout, and I think we could have had like real orchestra sound from those.
That's like such a student composer error, is to like think divisi equals more strings. Like,
no, it actually makes it thinner,
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The mock-up highlights too that this person thinks that maybe the strings are going to sound big throughout all that stuff, especially when there's a bunch of instruments playing.
But I do admire the ambition of it, because I feel like this is probably the most interesting the pieces we've heard so far, at least for me.
And I think it's really impressive. I don't know if it was written for a specific orchestra, but like just to write this without really having an orchestra performance attached to it, I think it's amazing that this person could achieve that. It's a big piece.
No, it's amazing that there are so many people around the world that have so much faith in still writing for orchestras. It's like, it's like actually really inspiring when you see something like this from a, like unknown composer. Like this, people are writing, like are interested in doing this kind of thing. It's like kind of unbelievable, I
think the composer does have a good intuitive sense of timing. It's hard for like a piece that is primarily sustain based to slow and sustain for 16 minutes is just always going to be challenging no matter who you are. There's no rhythmic sections and there's no fast sections, and that's and it's all in 4/4 and it's all continuous. That's just going to be a really, really tough challenge for literally. I mean, if you think about pieces like Atmospheres or Lontano, they're actually not that long. They're like 11 minutes, right?
I mean, this piece and the last piece too, it kind of reminded me of Become Ocean a little bit. How it's like very static, both of them. I think Become Ocean is so successful because like there are little things that's always changing, and also the shaping is insane in that piece. All these
there's the sense of escalation and de-escalation
Exactly.
constantly there. I mean, it's like it is true that like I think the biggest lesson for composers is like always be doing something even if the texture is static.
Right. So like especially in like this long held strings, like think about the shapes within that, and I think that would make the piece a lot more dimensional.
Let's move on to the next one. This is going to be number 51, last one.
I think for what this composer wanted to achieve, it was successful. But I mean, the stylistic thing is like a big question for composers these days, right? Because like, what does that even mean? And like, what is the style that you're supposed to write in? I feel like each school has different ideas about it. Each teacher has a different idea about it. Also, orchestras program all sorts of new music these days. It's an interesting question, but this piece was aggressively classical, early romantic, and for that medium, I thought it was successful.
I like the term aggressively classical. I guess to me, it's like I almost see it from like this kind of music always winds up having a kind of postmodern affect to me, where it like sounds like, you know, like the past plus like a movie that you saw it in plus the past. So it's like it's impossible for me to hear this music other than like in quotation marks, and I think that's always a challenging for me than to have like an honest emotional experience with music that is so, you know, filtered through so many layers of media and history. And that's probably my like intellectualized way of saying that I can't personally get super excited about music that is operating so much in a pastiche space.
But I guess the reason I really wanted not to just throw something at you guys that was different than the rest, but I always hear a lot of composers kind of complain, oh, you know, like nobody's writing in that kind of classical style anymore. Like why nobody? I've heard a lot of pieces that try to do that, but they're just actually not doing the techniques those composers are doing in those scores. There's complaining, but then when I actually see the results of what they're doing, it's like, well, you're not really doing. It's clear that you're not studying these scores. So what are you complaining about? So this person clearly did their homework. So that's what I appreciate about this.
It's sort of interesting when you think about sort of neoclassical Stravinsky, like what makes it interesting though, and it's usually what's not classical about it, not what's I mean, I think about the Serenade in A, when there's like, it's kind of tonal, but then there's always these weird chords that are kind of happening that are, you know, I guess the people who don't like neoclassical Stravinsky say it sounds like wrong note classical music, but I'm like, oh, there's such good wrong notes though, you know, like
Right. I mean, Symphony of Songs is like my favorite piece, and I think like neoclassical Stravinsky. I think so too, and like I think neoclassical Stravinsky is so Stravinsky because of how he voices his chords. You know, it might be just a triad, but like it's about how it's distributed around the orchestra. But like this person kind of like did what was the most idiomatic, and so it's kind of hard to find who this person is or where this person is in this piece, you know?
With this particular composer, my thinking is like, I wonder if this person took the same aggressive approach to score study with other genres of, you know, music. What would that be like?
Well, like it always opens up the question of like, I feel like there's a million composers out there writing bad facsimiles of Lachenmann or Ligeti.
Right, exactly.
And we're supposed to take, or Steve Reich, and we're supposed to take it seriously, but this person does a facsimile of Beethoven and it's problematic. I mean, it's really on some level very unfair.
I agree with that. But at the same time, even with like people who write pieces that sound like play or Reich,
Andrew Norman, yeah.
It's kind of hard to like see it something else rather than just a parody.
It's like, oh, that moment where you're not able to imitate the person and you do something wrong is the exact moment you should do for the entire piece, because suddenly it becomes you know?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone did a good job.
Yeah.
And I think you did a really good job of picking pieces that are so different to one another. I think that made it really, really interesting to just listen to everything.
Do each of you have two, let's say, that subjectively for you like?
I mean, I do have to pick 4 because it was the most ambitious one and I think it deserves it. I am kind of in between about 2 and 3. For me, 1 and 5, they were great, but they wouldn't be my winner. How do you feel about it, Chris?
Yeah, 1 and 5 you can pretty easily eliminate. And then I think the 2, as in number 7, not literally number 2, is probably the most successful in terms of it works the best out of all the pieces, but it's also fairly conventional. 3 and 4 are more interesting, but less successful. And that's kind of where I'm sort of sitting on all this stuff.
And I think From Nothing, the second piece was more successful because it was a lot shorter than the other ones too.
Yeah,
like it was 5
true.
minutes. So it was just like more condensed, did the thing, and it was done.
And I think we should value a composer being able to write a piece that's not too long. In fact, in life, that's one of the things that drives me the most crazy is like, you know, and so the fact that the second composer chose to make a piece that's not too long does like make me appreciate them.
But also to write a 16-minute orchestra piece without really having a performance lined up, that's dedication.
So 19.7 and 46. So we're kind of on a consensus on those 3. Or can we whittle it down to 2? So Moons, From Nothing, and Orbis.
It's funny they would propose eliminating the only piece that we definitely know sounds decent based on an actual recording. Something about moons that I don't know, but maybe it's cool. I don't know. I'm really on the fence, but like I said, I don't have like a really clear winner in my head on this one.
I feel like if it's between 3 and 4, I might choose 4. I feel like that piece was just a little bit more detailed and developed. Like I'm just looking through Moons again, and I think it just looks a little bare on the page. I think it sounded great, but
it doesn't quite do what it tries to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it really just has like, I don't know, it's lacking some detail.
So
Yeah,
is it
I
safe
agree,
to
I
say
agree.
that we take the number 19 moons out of this discussion here? Okay, great.
Apparently, I mean, you want to weigh in on this, Saad, or is it you're gonna remain
I want to get
agnostic
to the.
until-
I want to be agnostic till the very, if needed, till the end.
I'm really torn here, honestly, because it's like the really ambitious piece that doesn't quite work, but has a lot of interesting ideas, or the like really economical, sort of well done piece that kind of does something conventional, but really well and really thoughtfully. And that's
I am also thinking about what I might want to listen to at an actual concert. If that's what I'm thinking of, it would be the shorter piece. Because I
and
think
it
it
probably
was
would actually
successful.
work. Like I probably feel like in my heart of hearts feel like a good half of the Orbis would be a train wreck in real life. Not even just on a notational level. I'm just like, would half of this work? I don't know. It's really hard to judge.
I think it kind of depends on like what we are looking at. Are we looking at somebody who's trying to go further with orchestral writing and like is down to do experiments and trying things out, or are we looking for something that works? And that's a little safer.
Yeah, it's so impossible, right? You're like literally like, do I want to eat pizza or like banh mi? Like I like them both. And I can't judge them against each other.
This is the reality, though. I mean, this is why I wanted this kind of discussion public. There are objective things, right, that we found in all 5 pieces. But at the end of the day, it is subjective to each person, what they prefer.
Yeah, and like the weird piece is not so interesting to me in terms of like, it's not that it's not interesting, but it's not like I'm like, this person is doing something so incredibly cool artistically. But then at the same time, it is interesting. Like I'd probably be like, oh, that was weird and maybe too long. And the other piece was like, oh yeah, that piece was like conventional but successful. You know, neither piece is like, because there is nothing in Orbis that seems wildly impractical, honestly, when I look through it.
Right.
Like there's no, it's all pretty considered.
Yeah, I think it's doable.
I mean, I hate to say like who needs the NotePerformer, right? Because that's really the only difference.
Neither of
first
them
and
need
second.
no
That's the other thing. They don't really need the prize. They both will get the one-on-one. So at this point, it's actually pretty equal what they get. It's more of just the bragging rights who wins the competition.
If I am approaching it like a composer, I might give it to the longer piece. But if I'm approaching it like somebody who's gonna listen to this at a concert, I would totally pick the second piece. Maybe that's what I want to pick, the second piece.
Also, Galaxy Brain take. Someone might watch this podcast and hear piece 2 and actually program it, and their life would be improved because maybe someone will actually hear the winner of this thing and be like, "Oh, my college orchestra. I'm a college orchestra conductor. Like, I'll actually program this piece. It's cool." But then no one is doing that for the other piece, you know, because it would require like the LA Phil or someone amazing to actually play that piece as well. And the LA Phil is probably not programming off of Saad's podcast.
True. I can guarantee that. All right. Well, then drum roll, please. We're going to announce the winner then. So the winner of the inaugural Saad Haddad Prize, that's going to go to Mr. Brian Chu from Nothing.
Wow. I was
Okay.
right. I knew it. I knew it.
Amazing.
Runner-up going to be Orbis by Patrick Herman. And then we have Moons by Sophie Mathieu. Then we had Majnoon in the Wilderness by Kian Ruvai. And then we had Suite for Orchestra by Ali Afifi. So thank you guys so much. This was really fun, and congratulations to the winner. Special shout out to our jury members, Nikki Sohn and Christopher Cerrone. If you'd like to hear their work, I've listed their details in the description below, as well as their appearances on my podcast, The Saad Haddad Show. See you all next time.